TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
How do you make original content for Snapchat? How do you make an award-winning documentary with access to George W. Bush, Condoleezza Rice, Dick Cheney, and CIA and US Secret Service directors? And how do we deal with the TV industry's talent crunch? On this week's show, my guests are John Farrar, Chief Creative Officer of Future Studios, documentary filmmaker Adam Wishart, and Production Guild of Great Britain CEO Professor Lyndsay Duffy. It's all coming up on this week's TellyCast. My first guest on this week's TellyCast heads up one of the world's leading next-generation factual content production businesses. Recently rebranded from Barcroft Studios to Future Studios, Chief Creative Officer John Farrar heads up the company that creates shows for terrestrial, cable, and digital networks and runs one of the biggest factual channels on social media called Truly. Welcome to TellyCast, John Farrar. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing good, Justin. Thank you for having me on.
Been meaning to do this for a while, so it's great to be able to have a chat. There's obviously lots going on with the Future Studios business at the moment and lots of activity that we've seen, lots of shows that you've got on air right now, and obviously lots going on social. Can you give us a bit of an overview of Future Studios? Because I think many people knew Barcroft Studios and how the business developed over the last few years, but obviously things have changed a bit. So tell us a bit about how things have changed since it was acquired by Future.
So the Barcroft Studios model of old essentially had two kind of main pillars to the business. There was the publishing side, which was all of the original content that we made internally with our internal commissioning team, our internal production teams, creating content for Snapchat, YouTube, Facebook, delivering around 50 films every month that were monetized across those platforms. And then alongside that sat a kind of external division that was looking at TV opportunities, both in the streamer market and also the cable market, and also kind of premium digital originals as well. And I originally joined Barcroft as their creative director to look after the external division. And then as the business was sold and Sam and Alex and Casper moved on, I've then taken over both bits of the business. And we've also now, with the formation of Future Studios, there's a third very significant pillar to what we're doing. So Future, for people who don't know, is a kind of global platform business for specialist media with kind of multiple divisions. So there's a magazine division, there's a media division, there's a B2B division. In that magazine division, there are over 200 brands, websites, magazines that all need video. And so what we're also doing now is we are producing video for those magazines every month. So to give you an idea, in October, we produced 200 films. We received about 132 million video views. We've been really focusing our energies into the kind of tech, gaming space and women lifestyle pages. And over time, we will kind of be producing video for the whole group. So the two original divisions are very much stayed as they are, and we've now integrated this third division. And that was really the idea of becoming Future Studios. Was really like it was a trying to take a kind of 360 approach to everything we were creating. And so now when we're looking at our internal development, we're thinking about our social channels, we're thinking about our external clients, and we're also really heavily thinking about our kind of internal portfolio of channels and websites, and trying to create ideas that can live in multiple places, I guess, is the kind of essence of what we're doing day to day.
It's it's this enormous amount of content creation there across all of these different platforms that you're developing, and I guess one of the shows that is a Future magazine property and has been rebooted into a new TV show is Gamesmaster. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how Gamesmaster Rebooted came about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this really speaks to the company and the strategy. And actually, I've got to probably give a quick shout out to Ian Lamara at Alaska, who's our kind of co-production partner on it. So he originally had the idea of bringing Gamesmaster back. He'd approached the tech and gaming team inside Future, who were the rights holder to Gamesmaster, and they were beginning that conversation of like, can we take this project back out? Is the timing now? Is it a good timing for a show like this? As those conversations were developing, Future bought Barcroft, and then obviously with buying Barcroft, they've also got a production team. So we partnered with the guys at Alaska. We worked very kind of hard with our kind of internal gaming team, and one of the real benefits of what we've got in Future is because we've got this huge tech and gaming audience. It meant that all of those kind of creative decisions that we were making about what should this show look like now, how do we reflect modern gaming, how do we bring this show up to date, but also hold on to the original DNA of the show. These were conversations that we could have with a very kind of loyal tech and gaming audience. And so, we were able to, get this show over the line with Channel 4. Again, quite a kind of unusual process. It's a digital first commission. It's co-financed by Channel 4 and also MetaQuest. So there was a kind of number of kind of stakeholders involved. It's been a real kind of incredible experience for us. It's been, a real creative challenge. We had a brilliant team on it. Our showrunner, Keane McGillicuddy, our series producer, Emily Smith, our production exec, Tammy McKendrick, have worked kind of all hours of the day to pull off a show, which I think is really, we're really proud of and we can really stand behind. And I think, we were walking this tightrope all the way through production, which is, it needs to feel modern, it needs to feel different, but we can't alienate that kind of core, loyal Gamesmaster fan. And I really feel like we've done it. I feel like we've pulled something off that's really, really incredible and really exciting.
That's the key, isn't it? When you're rebooting something, and it must have been a fair bit of extra pressure because it was a Future brand. And this is going back to the original series, which was, how long ago did the original series run?
So the original series ran, I think it's 90 episodes, 7 seasons, all through the 90s. And there had been conversations prior to us about bringing it back to life. And when we started talking to our tech and gaming team saying we think the time is now, there was a slight kind of eye roll of like, oh no, here we go again. But thankfully, like all great commissions, the stars align. The 4 Studios team did a great job, kind of with the relationship with MetaQuest. That I think made it the timing of releasing the Quest 2 over at Christmas. And when we heard about that, I think that gave us a real feeling that this could now be the right time.
Meta was essentially Facebook, wasn't it? It's the new virtual reality headset.
Yeah, so Meta is the kind of master brand, and of which Facebook now is the social network, and the Quest is the Oculus headset, which is the kind of VR gaming experience, which is I've got to say it's really good. We feature it in the show. We have these kind of VT segments where the Quest features, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so it's brand funded content with one of the biggest media businesses in the world. You've got Channel 4 who are also bringing the show back for their E4 audience. It also debuted on YouTube, didn't it? A few days before the actual E4 broadcast.
This is all quite kind of pioneering stuff, and we were all, kind of walking on the moon together with this one. But yeah, the idea is to kind of do a really big kind of land grab for the audience. So there's obviously a very loyal social audience for something like this. So we've got both the linear episodes playing on YouTube. They go out on the Sunday night before the Wednesday transmission on E4. We've also got these extended social segments, which have really been built by kind of digital first producers that also live on across YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. And then we obviously have the main program. And then alongside that, and again, this is one of I think the really interesting things that we can do at Future is that we can also create a huge amount of noise within our tech and gaming brands like Games Radar that are kind of featuring articles on the show, giving exclusive kind of interviews and behind the scenes content, and again driving the audience back to the E4 show. So yeah, it's the first time I've worked in this way, but it seems to be working. I think we got 100,000 viewers on YouTube within about 3 or 4 days on the first episode. It performed well. It performed well on E4. We're still waiting on all the consolidated numbers to come together. I checked in on the social segment. The first one we did, I think that's at about 150,000 views, and that's only been up for a few days. So yeah, it's a really, and I think the E4 audience and the YouTube audience. What one of the insights is, and this is something that actually when I first joined Barcroft and really kind of getting a sense of how digital and linear work side by side is that, the old school of thought is that these audiences would kind of cannibalize each other, whereas actually really what you find is it's all really additive, and it's just finding audience in different places, which again is really exciting.
Yeah, and that's really what Channel 4 staked its future on as well, hasn't it? This new, bold, digital-first commissioning strategy, and to come up with a big brand-funded show, which was a classic brand, produce that in the right way that feels right to the classic audience, but also the new generation of fans. I mean, we all know how popular Twitch is and how video gaming, how massive it is, first of all, but also how massive people watching video gaming content on YouTube and on Twitch and on these other social channels. It's about bringing all of that together, and it must be a huge challenge. Congratulations on pulling it off.
Thank you.
So what else are you working on then? Tell us about what else is going on at Future Studios.
I'll kind of try and walk you through the three pillars. So on the external side, we are in production with the Snap original team on a really fun fact tent format called Reunited, which really kind of tells these kind of incredible stories of families coming together, loved ones coming together, relationships, siblings, very much kind of targeted at the kind of the holiday period, Thanksgiving through till Christmas, which will begin publishing in the next couple of weeks. So we have a series called Attack on Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute, which is going out on Channel 5 this week, which is looked after by Peter Wiles, who's the exec producer on that, and the series producer is Steve Webb. And that's it's a kind of box set, factual 3-part series that really kind of, goes into the kind of the minute by minute breakdown of the events at Pearl Harbor, going out, coinciding with the 75th anniversary. We're also trying to now kind of extend that into a format, which is something that we're starting to talk to buyers about internationally, which is really cool. And we've got another series in with A&E called Ultimate Rides, which is a kind of car show hosted by Danny Coker. We've just about to announce a new series that we're working with A&E for Sky History, which I don't think has been announced yet. So that's something that we'll hopefully be able to shout about quite soon. On our kind of future original side, we are doing a true crime series with Marie Claire. We're also doing a series called Tales from the Hard Drive. And then we're trying to kind of move into the kind of unexplained territory with a kind of digital first series called Unexplained, which explores kind of paranormal activity. And again, I think that they're really interesting to me because they really speak to this new approach to development, which is, again, these are self-funded series that will live on our O&O sites, that will live on our social sites, which will also then, once we've finished them and we've got all the kind of the learnings and the data, we will absolutely roll them out as projects that we'll be pitching to external clients. And then on our Truly side, so Truly is the channel that runs on YouTube, which is all of our, social first content. We've got, a number of series doing incredibly well. I guess the one that's most notable is a series called Love Don't Judge, which we've been making for a couple of years now, which is, they're the kind of the real life Romeo and Juliet relationships against all the odds. We're getting, kind of insane viewing figures for at the moment. So yeah, as you say, lots going on.
In terms of you were very much in the linear production space, weren't you, before you joined Barcroft as it was then? The skills that you need to pick up very, very quickly, because what you're producing original content for specific platforms. So you talked about the Snap originals. Just being able to oversee an original show that's produced for Snapchat is very different to producing that same show for YouTube or for Facebook Watch. How do you get across that so quickly?
There's elements to it which are universal. So a great story, a great character, an incredible piece of access, a world first is kind of universal, whether you're working in linear or you're working in digital. And so I feel like what I do is I lean on what I think I'm best at, which is telling stories, and then apply that skill set to those different formats and structures. And, and often, one of the biggest challenges going from, linear to digital are the budgets, right? We work across some pretty sizable budgets on the external side. What we try and do is make a little go a long way on our, internal side. We've got a big in-house team that are, incredible at what they do. We're leaning much more on an internal team for our own publishing, and then we're leaning into a much more of a freelancer team on the external side. And so with that comes lots of different challenges as well. In terms of the different platforms, again, I feel like there is actually a lot of synergy in terms of what they're looking for. And I guess what our job within it is to try and, we have a huge amount of development going on, and it's really trying to target what we think are the best ideas for the platforms. And that's, staying very close to what they're looking for, what they're asking for. We do with the Snap Original team, for example, we do a lot of kind of co-development where we get in on a conversation quite early. We pitch them kind of early top line. Sometimes that's coming out of the trends that we're seeing on our own internal side. Sometimes it's ideas that they're having. And then it's about being very aligned and working very kind of closely together, I think.
I know that you produced a show called Frontline Heroes, which was right in the middle of the first pandemic. So lots of stories from literally the front line for people that are sort of keeping society going, if you like. Working with Snapchat, there's relatively few production businesses that seem to be creating those original programming for that network. It's interesting to know how producing a show for Snapchat is different to producing it for Facebook, for example. I mean, is it purely about length and, how that format works? How does a format work on Snapchat?
There's a kind of optimal time frame. So, when we're making a Snap original, we're often looking at the kind of 5-minute 30 to 6-minute 15. It's vertical. We're using a lot of split screen. We're using a lot of CSA, text on screen. The pacing of it is very, very quick. What we really heavily analyze, the first 15 seconds. We're trying to kind of win that audience all the way through. But that beginning piece is so crucial. And interestingly, when I'm thinking about linear, I'm often thinking I can win the audience for the first 2 minutes. I might have a chance of holding on to them till the end. But with something like Snap, you're really looking at that kind of that first 15, 20 seconds. So we might spend as long analyzing that very, very beginning piece as we are the whole episode.
Now it's time for your story of the week, John, your TV industry news story that's caught your eye over the past 7 days. Tell us, what's your story of the week?
There's actually two stories that I think are really interesting to unpack. So the first one is the story of Lush and their decision to stop advertising on social media until it's more brand safe. As a publisher, as a team of content creators who are making content for the social platforms and continually having conversations with our partners around making content brand safe, I think, and it's something that is really important, and it's something that we, absolutely stand by. What we've pride ourselves in at Future Studios is we make content that can be, outwardly quite tabloidy, but when you get inside it, it's much more kind of broadsheet. And so the storytelling and the journalism and the care we take in telling the stories is absolutely there. But often to try and grab that audience, we're doing something quite kind of, headline grabbing. And as these platforms become more brand safe, what we're going to start seeing is diminishing revenue. And then that's going to throw up into a conversation about, what's all of our kind of corporate responsibility in terms of, we are here essentially to make money. Making money through safer content, I think, just means that we're all going to have to work a lot harder. And that's something that I think is, that we for one are really excited by. If Lush is saying that they're pulling out of advertising on social platforms, that means that those conversations are happening across the board. And I think it means that, companies like us have to pivot and have to move very quickly, have to align with that and, work incredibly hard to kind of maintain those large viewing figures that we've had for so long. We have a number of kind of checks and balances in place at any one time to make sure that our content is right for these platforms. We're going to see and feel a lot more of this over the coming months and years.
Is there any sort of wider authority, or even if it's a loose collective of businesses talking to each other about what sort of content that they're producing and what sort of guidelines they should be adhering to?
There's lots of informal conversations happening. There's not a kind of a central committee as far as I'm aware of producers to kind of, swap ideas. Maybe it does exist. Maybe they just haven't invited me onto it yet. But but it's not that I'm aware of.
Right. Okay. Well, if anybody knows about one who's listening, just let us know. Even if it's a loose framework, perhaps there should be one. And what's your other story, John?
So my second story is Chaos at the Castle and the challenges that the I'm a Celebrity team are having with the new series. This really speaks to just how hard it is to make a huge format in 2021. You've got, obviously, COVID is massively challenging. We made a series last year in New York called Biggest Little Christmas Showdown, which was a competitive dolls house making show, which we filmed just as New York was opening up. And it was incredibly challenging from a COVID perspective. And now also with the I'm a Celebrity news, you've got challenges with the talent, finding the experience very difficult. You've got obviously the natural disaster happening, and I think what I find interesting about this story is that obviously we all know that formats are gold, and you get a format right that can sell all around the world. It is incredibly profitable and lucrative, but there must be a point on the kind of the axis where there's a tipping point, right, where these shows are so hard to make, they're so fraught. Are they still viable as big investments? And I still strongly believe that the big formats will be around for a long, long time. But just reading about the challenges made me question that a little bit.
For listeners outside the UK who may not be aware of this, we've had quite a few storms over the last few days, and that's impacted on production, because obviously I'm a Celebrity is usually happens in Australia. It's actually now been filmed in a Welsh castle. The extreme weather, in which sadly there's been I think 3 people killed in Wales, or certainly in the UK during these storms. So it's obviously been seen as fairly unsafe to continue. And that's added to Richard Madeley, one of the contestants, who was taken out of the show ill right on the first couple of days and was unable to return because he broke out the COVID bubbles. It's still the biggest show on UK TV. Maybe all the hassle is worth it.
I hope so. I guess from my perspective, it's just not wanting the big broadcasters to give up on the big formats, which I don't believe they ever will. But just reading about the challenges with this season, it really has been that perfect storm of challenges.
And now it's time for your hero of the week, John. Who or what is your hero of the week?
So my hero of the week is Jon Snow, who is obviously retiring after, I believe it's 45 years of service. And, the man is an absolute legend. I remember sitting in the audience, I think in 2019 when he did the McTaggart, and listening to his career and what he stands for. It was really motivating. And, he's just, he's a legendary broadcaster, journalist, storyteller, and I particularly liked him because at one point with Gamesmaster, we approached him. We were wanting to film a VT where a speed streamer, someone who does video games at a certain kind of over a certain period of time, was going to break into his house, set up a computer, do a speed trial whilst Jon Snow slept in a bed behind him to see if he could do it before Jon Snow woke up. And when we approached Jon Snow about this idea, thinking he would absolutely say, on your bike, he was like, oh, that sounds really good fun. And so I just think, yeah, absolute legend of a man. Wish him all the best. And I think I've also just recently read that he's got a 9-month-old in the house as well. So, hats off to him for that.
Amazing. Yeah, that's Jon Snow, your hero of the week. And who or what are you telling to get in the bin, John?
So this is a tricky one. So I think I'm telling TikTok to get in the bin. Ooh. And the reason for that is that I, about 6 months ago, downloaded TikTok, and just obviously for research purposes. And I think I now spend about 2 hours a day on TikTok. I'm so unbearably addicted to it. It's going to destroy my marriage and probably every other part of my life as well. Although I love it, I think I've got to put it in the bin, or at least put some kind of blocker on my phone so I can't spend quite as much time on it as I currently am.
I can't go there, John. I can't. I mean, I can't.
I pray, take it from me. Do not, if you can avoid it. I mean, it is the most kind of wonderful kind of rabbit hole to kind of get lost down. And but once you're down that rabbit hole, it's very hard to climb back out.
I mean, I'm it's bad enough with all the social networks that I've got, and then all the SVODs and everything else that you're watching, all the programming that you're watching. It's just like, no, I can't possibly add another layer of complication to that. Interesting. All right, so TikTok is going in the bin.
Good stuff.
John, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really enjoyed having you on TellyCast. Fascinating. In terms of, what we were talking about earlier as well, there's a lot of talk about the metaverse, isn't there now, when, everybody's starting to look towards the next generation of social content. I wonder whether all of the lessons learned when it comes to regulation and what sort of content and all the negative aspects of social media that we're aware of, I really hope that will be taken forward and addressed when it comes to this next generation, because obviously all these different digital businesses that are going to be and are such a big part of our life, they're only ever going to be really become a bit more powerful, aren't they? So I really hope it becomes much more of a positive space, and perhaps in some areas it isn't.
Yeah, agree.
John, thanks so much for coming on TellyCast this week. Really enjoyed chatting to you, and good luck with Gamesmaster. Good luck with the Pearl Harbor show as well. We'll see you in person very soon.
Excellent. Thanks, Justin.
My next guest on this week's show is multi-award-winning filmmaker and director of what's surely the best documentary film of the year, 9/11 Inside the President's War Room. Welcome to TellyCast, Adam Wishart.
Thanks very much.
Great to have you on the show, Adam. First of all, congratulations on the success of this remarkable film. I see you've just won a Rose d'Or in the last few days.
Yeah, it's been an amazing ride. Nobody expected the film to be this successful. 6.5 million people have watched it in the UK. We won a Rose d'Or a couple of days ago. Yeah, I won Best Director at the Royal Television Society Craft a few weeks ago. So it's amazing, heartening.
Very well deserved, if you don't mind me saying.
Thanks very much.
Before we talk about the film, can you give us a little background into your career to date? Because I always find it fascinating to get a bit of an insight into our guests' career journeys and the wider picture of how you got to where you are now. So just tell us how you got started in TV and how your career's developed to date.
In my 20s, I was a housing campaign worker, and I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. And so I decided to get in TV, and I started writing TV proposals. And that led me to become a production trainee on the BBC scheme, which was really the door that opened everything in a way. And so I got to work with some great people, like Dan Reed, who just made 4 Hours on the Capitol. But I also got to direct loads of shorts for magazine shows and stuff like that. And then I made one of the first sets of constructed reality shows called Back to the Floor, which won a RTS award in 97. And I took the head teacher of a posh school into an East London comprehensive for Back to the Floor, Class Apart. And then since then, I've either written books or I've made TV shows. And I guess one of the things I think that I come to making television about is I want to make television in the way that you'd write a book. The book industry is quite different to telly. They don't really have schedules. They back extraordinary kind of risky creative visions. And often that means they've got a sort of much wider palette of content. And, I wrote 2 books, and then after that I thought I'd try and make films, but with a kind of aesthetic of book writing.
Do you also seek out challenging projects to bring to the screen? Because some of your documentaries that you've made, issues about animal testing and Somalian warlords, for example, is it about just seeking out these challenging untold stories that motivates you?
I really like getting access and meeting people in institutions, and I do that for very personal reasons. I like meeting doctors and understanding how a hospital environment works. I loved meeting the Bush community. I made a series a few years ago called Murder in the Car Park, which was about 30 years of a police investigation. It was fascinating to meet the 360 degrees of that story, the policeman, the family of the victim and the people that for 30 years the Metropolitan Police had accused of doing it. And so, I was fascinated to kind of dive into that world, and it appears I'm quite good at persuading people to be in my TV programs, and I do that because I like the relationships with people. Part of it is the challenge, no doubt. I mean, trying to get access to the man who was formerly the most powerful man on earth was certainly an interesting challenge, and one that I sort of adopted because I thought would be difficult.
In terms of access, it doesn't get much more impressive than 9/11 inside the president's war room. For anyone who hasn't seen the film yet, and it doesn't sound like there's a great deal of people, but can you give us a bit of an overview of the film?
I mean, I was sitting in a BBC briefing a few years ago, and Simon Young, the commissioner, said, what he wanted to do in history was to tell stories of great historical events from people that were inside the room. And, pretty quickly you arrive at 9/11 as a significant, it's arguably the most consequential event of our generation. And the thought was, my initial thought was, could you tell the story of 9/11 from inside the presidency? With access to President Bush and his Vice President Dick Cheney and all of their advisors, Secret Service, whoever else was with them. Two things about it. One is I'd never seen that perspective. These were the people that were on that day changing the world. How did that happen? So I wanted to understand what happened, in those rooms. And so that's what the film is. The film is what happened to the presidency that day, how they reacted to the unfolding events, and then how they began to formulate policy that would affect us for the next 20 years.
It really is stunning. So let's take a listen to a clip from the film.
9/11 would become a date to remember. It's the job of a president is to protect the American people from harm. And some presidents don't need to worry about that, and some do. And it turns out I was one that did. Andy Card comes up to behind me and says, "Second plane has hit the second tower, America's under attack." And I'm watching a child read. And then I see the press in the back of the room beginning to get the same message I just got. And I could see the horror etched on the face of the news people who had just gotten the same news. During a crisis, it's really important to set a tone and not to panic. And so I waited for the appropriate moment to leave the classroom. I didn't want to do anything dramatic. I didn't want to, lurch out of the chair and scare the classroom full of children. And so I waited.
Try it again. Get ready for the beginning of that sentence. Get ready.
So Adam, what's really stunning in this film is that remarkable access that you got, not only to George W. Bush, but everyone else who was there. And it's just about everybody else, surely, with Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, Dick Cheney, Karl Rove, his Secret Service details, senior advisors, the deputy director of the CIA. I mean, how on earth do you go about telling this story and getting that sort of access? How did you go about that?
Well, I mean, I have a view that all access is about creating communities of trust. And in some ways, it's easier to understand if you're on a hospital ward. If you're on a hospital ward and you're trying to operate as a filmmaker, there's 150 people or something that come and go on shifts. And it's really important that all of them understand what you're up to broadly, and that at all levels, they're comfortable with what you're doing. And that means, like, if you're interviewing the professor on that ward, the very senior person at the top of the pyramid, if you're interviewing him, it's really important that the orderly, the cleaner or whatever, understands what you're doing too, because the professor knows that the day after it's broadcast, that person is going to make fun of him. And so, you only get a really great interview if everybody in that little community has agreed to what you're doing. And so, the the way you get access in all of these things is you kind of create a kind of body of trust. And so the same was true for the presidency. It was clear how we wanted to do it, but you could only do it if you imagine the presidency as a pyramid in which the president sits at the top, and then Condoleezza and Dick Cheney are a level below it, and then there's a level of senior advisors, and then there's a level of kind of more kind of peripheral people like Secret Service. The film could only be made if all levels of that pyramid would give me good kind of trusting access. And the way to get access in most of these occasions is to work from the bottom up. First of all, we got a layer of kind of advisors, and then we got senior advisors, and then we got in-principle buy-in from Secretary Rice and from Vice President Dick Cheney. And then finally, the president offered to do an interview.
Wow. So, I mean, I would have thought it'd be the other way around, right? I mean, you get the top of the pyramid and then, if he's doing it, I guess I should. But that's interesting.
I think you can make documentaries like that. And if the President Bush is doesn't do very many interviews, he only wants to participate if, on sort of pucker good stuff. And one way to test whether it's good stuff is to make sure everybody else has been interviewed first. We had a sort of in-principle agreement that he was going to take part, but we didn't have any contract or anything. We didn't know that he was going to do it. We just understood that this was the strategy that would get us to do it, and that it was the 20th anniversary, and he couldn't avoid doing all interviews, so he was likely to do us.
And how long did this process take then, from you starting development to actually getting the okay from George W. Bush?
I wrote the first proposal for this film 4 years ago. I think one of the streamers just turned it down. And then 3 years ago, I started approaching it more critically, more determinedly, and I wrote another proposal that was frankly better. We worked out a strategy about how we would get access. And the first part of how we would get access was to get the BBC on board, because they were the only broadcaster that we thought had any kind of traction with the Bush community. And so it took me about another 6 months to get the BBC on board or something. So from about April 2019 or something, I was going to America, building this community of trust. And so I spent from April 19 to the beginning of lockdown building this community of trust and getting people on board. And then at that stage, Apple TV Plus came on board to fund it. And then from September 2020, I went to America for the first time with a film crew, and we were on the road for 10 weeks. And we did 25 interviews across, we drove 5,000 miles and went to 20 states or something. While we were, in the middle of the pandemic, we were collecting interviews. While other people couldn't move, we kind of just about moved around with very stringent COVID protocols. And then I came back this time last year, and then we went out again in early February and collected some more interviews, including the president.
Well, that adds another layer of complication, doesn't it? The COVID protocols and physically moving around, which must have been a massive challenge, because I guess also a lot of the interviewees were probably feeling a little bit nervous about COVID as well, as individuals, as well as participating in the film.
Oh, yeah, it was enormously complicated. I mean, this was before vaccines. Like the majority of our interviews were before vaccines. And it added a whole kind of extra stress. I mean, we had we basically decided that we couldn't fly most places. So, I mean, in total, we drove 10,000 miles across America. I mean, for Vice President Dick Cheney, we created the most expensive Zoom call in history. In his garage, we created a kind of a robotic studio with 2 robot cameras. And so there was no in-person interaction, in which he could sit there and we could sit in a kind of truck, which is a bit like a studio gallery in his driveway, which is, completely fair enough. He's had a heart transplant and has got a very compromised immune system. The last thing he needs is a bunch of Brits turning up in his house. And, we did that for a few other people. And so it was very complicated. The flip side of it is I think there was a marginal advantage in the other direction, which is, these are very kind of alpha people who have very busy schedules in normal life. and getting time with them, significant time with people, would have been very difficult, especially on the, it was only greenlit in August 2020. And so delivering a film of that quality in a year would have been very complicated. And so we could literally say we're turning up in New Hampshire or Texas or whatever, in 3 days' time. We know you're available. Will you do the interview? And so people had more time for us and were in that our crazy road trip schedule, they could fit around in a much easier manner. So that was a benefit, I think.
Mm. And so were you literally staying in hotels or motels and going, right, okay, we can do Cheney day after tomorrow, let's go? Or was it a case of that, not knowing where you were going to be filming, on a weekly basis, or was it a little bit more structured?
We landed in America on September the 15th, 2020. And although I'd done a lot of work creating this community of trust, we only had 5 dates in the diary to do the interviews. We had a collection of people and prospects, and it was complicated. It was sort of moving on a daily basis. I remember we were in Washington and we'd hoped to go to collect a few people in like the Southwest, and people weren't getting back to me. So then we decided to go to Florida and pick up the schoolgirl in the classroom and stuff like that, and various other people, and a military one of the military advisors to Cheney and stuff who were in Florida, because they were available and nobody else was at that point. And so, we were moving our, this wasn't a schedule that was all predetermined. We were moving the schedule as and when. Karl Rove, we only picked up after we'd done the president. He happened to be available. We were in Texas. He was now willing to do it. And we landed in the middle of the worst snowstorm in Austin's and Texan history, and basically got snowed in, couldn't get out. It was very fragile, both our road trip, COVID protocols, and persuading people to do an interview that somehow fitted to our schedule and where we were. People had to be available according to where the truck was.
Yeah, well, it must have taken an enormous amount of patience and determination, and but I guess it must have been an incredible buzz, though, just being able to really create what I think this film is. This is a really important historical document, capturing the panic and the terror of 9/11. And one of the revelations of the film was that really struck me was that at one point on Air Force One, when the president was airborne, there was a code word miscommunication, wasn't there? And there was concern that actually the president might be in danger on Air Force One as it was flying to its next destination.
Yeah, they were taking very seriously the threats to the president. As the Secret Service says in the film, if these people had been able to fly aircraft into 2 towers and the president's location was widely known, then they could also, fly the plane into the school. And, you realize that, in a time of attack, there is the fog of war. Nobody knew what was happening. How you get onto Air Force One is already predetermined, but, the Secret Service threw all that out of the window and they started fingertip searching everybody's bags from scratch. And so everybody on the plane was in a heightened sense of alert and was scared. People in the White House were. And at one point, Dick Cheney phoned up the president and said that somebody had phoned up the White House switchboard and said, Angel is next. And yet nobody knew, nobody outside that circle knew what Angel was. And so if somebody was saying Angel is next, then presumably that, there was the possibility that this, as somebody says in the film, this was going to be an inside job. Perhaps the president was under threat whilst flying on Air Force One.
It really lays out the sort of the paranoia. And I think, what struck me was that, when there's war happening or various different major events, you kind of think government's got, or the military or the Secret Services or whoever it is, they've kind of got it covered. Hopefully you've got a little bit of confidence in this system that is set up to protect us. But I think what was quite scary about your film was laying out the fact that, that there wasn't, as you say, fog of war. There wasn't a plan as such, and they were just making it up as they went along. And it was, I think that was really the most terrifying part of it.
Well, I think part of the reason for making this film is I think we as the public misunderstand how government works, and we misunderstand those people who are in the middle of it. I thought it was interesting to tease that apart, really, arguably the biggest governmental crisis of our generation. And so, I mean, I, like you, think that government knows what it's doing and that it's ticked every box and that it's an orderly and concerted process. These people are just human, aren't they, like us? They're living in the same human chaos that we are. And, they're trying their best. And they're trying really hard to get a handle on events and to do stuff. And, I think we should give them that respect. We denigrate politicians and we do it to our danger. Because in denigrating politicians, we caricature them and we caricature their endeavour. And that means we don't fully understand what it is they do, and we make judgments about them that are to some extent unfair. And so I think it's useful to understand what these people are doing at their moment, at the moment of greatest crisis.
And talking about politicians, I think the other thing that struck me about the film was, I think it really paints George W. Bush in a completely new light. And I think in retrospect shows that he was a real leader. I think at the time, he was a bit of a source of derision or fun. Nobody really seemed to take him seriously in the first part of his presidency. And I certainly from, I think a lot of satirists in the UK in particular would, painted him as somebody who didn't really have a clue and, couldn't speak properly. But I think, this film really reveals a different side to him as a real leader that perhaps we didn't give him credit for at the time.
Well, I do think it's interesting, isn't it, that, that one thing the film revealed to me is the extent to which we caricature public figures, and that, I do in my own mind, I get a kind of fixed version of who somebody is. And then every piece of information that confirms that caricature, I hold dear, and every piece that contradicts it, I throw away. And so, people can make their own judgments about President Bush, but, my intent as a documentary maker is that people in my films, I want people to recognise themselves in the films that I make with them. And I want to, make them whole characters, whole human beings. And so, President Bush is very different from the caricature that we have of him. I mean, for example, we cut a scene that's not in the film in which he cries in the Oval Office 2 days after 9/11 because the stress and the tragedy and the impact of the people, has touched him so much. And yet, the caricature of President Bush is of a sort of heartless warmonger. There are two versions of the film. In the American version of the film, there's a scene in which in the Apple version of the film, I should say, there's a scene in which he's hugging, he hugs and responds to the families of first responders who think they're dead. And one-to-one, he's a very sort of empathetic, person-orientated person. And yet, if we compare our sort of public ideas of Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, Bill Clinton is thought to be in public sort of consciousness this kind of extraordinarily charismatic man who, would welcome you into his golden circle as soon as you step into the room. And, you wouldn't imagine that of President Bush. And yet, I think President Bush, has many of those qualities. It just doesn't fit into the caricature that we had of him.
Talking about the Apple version of the BBC, I mean, how did that co-production work between these two? Because I guess that there haven't really been that many co-productions between these two organisations. I mean, I think there's one or two, but perhaps not on this scale. How was that? How was that experience working with both these partners?
I think we were the first co-production that Apple TV Plus had ever done with any broadcaster in any territory. It was great in lots of respects. They had slightly different sensibilities, and like many co-productions, you come up with slightly different films, but the substance of them is exactly the same. We were lucky enough to be able to be funded to make these two slightly different films.
Was it commissioned from Apple in the UK? Was that Jay Hunt, or did that come from America, the Ultimate?
It was commissioned by the UK, by Jay Hunt, and it was commissioned by Jay Hunt originally. She saw it through the editorial stuff. She and Alison Kirkham.
And how about the archive? Because obviously archive is always really important when we're talking about, this major event 20 years ago. How did you go about sourcing this? Because some of the archive footage isn't the most common footage that we're perhaps more familiar with when we think about 9/11. There was access to, air traffic control conversations, audio clips from flight decks of the planes, but also, some of the clips. There's one clip of the second plane going in from the ground that I haven't seen before. How did you go about choosing what footage to use, and how did you source it?
Well, we had an amazing archive team, and we set out sort of very ambitious. I mean, particularly Simon Finch, who was a creative producer and edit director on the Apple film, was very ambitious about what the archive should be, and that we should get the best possible version of it in all the places. And so we had a very determined hunt for what would be the best archive. And I think Zoe Flood, who was one of the producers on this, I think at one point she started mapping all the possible camera people who were on the ground in Manhattan on that day to understand, who might have footage for what moments and what footage we had missed out. And so, we were just harvesting as much as we could and then making editorial choices.
It's crucial, archive, for telling this story as well as these interviews. So I think that you can tell there's a lot of thought has gone into it.
We were lucky that there was also, there's a photographer who follows the president every day, and there's a photographer who sometimes follows the vice president, but chosen that day to follow him. And so there was this enormous photographic record of the day, which, was fundamental to making the film. And it had been over the previous 2 or 3 years before we started making the film, it had been unwrapped from its kind of secret wrapper by the National Archives. And so we were allowed to use it and publish new photographs that had never been published before. And, hundreds of new photographs that had never been published before. And together with Peep Show, who is this extraordinary graphic design company, they came up with a plan that would allow us to best show those photographs in a way that was kind of consistent with the historical record, that makes it feel more truthful. Nobody had ever tried to tell the story of 9/11 from the point of view of the presidency and map the oral history of that day with those interviews with this photographic record, much of which hadn't been seen. And so that was the intent of the film.
Yeah. And it starts, doesn't it, at 6:40, I think it is, in the morning, with George W. Bush going for a jog in the dark, and he shouts to a Bloomberg journalist, Richard Keel, whose nickname was Stretch, wasn't he? Because he's such a tall guy. He's just said, come for a run with me. From that point onwards, 6:40, and then the film follows the key points of the day throughout the next, 24 hours, but then onwards, and it also paints various other scenes with Bush visiting the wreckage of the World Trade Center as well, which was another key point in his presidency, wasn't it? The way that he was addressing the emergency responders and the New York Fire Department who were sifting through the wreckage.
In the first 9 months of President Bush's presidency, it was a world of innocence. He had arrived in power to follow a domestic agenda. I mean, Dick Cheney says it, they weren't that interested in foreign policy. That's the moment we begin with, a kind of innocent run on a golf course at 6:40 in the morning on 9/11. And then it takes you through the attacks, the 3 planes into the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, the crash in Shanksville of the 4th plane. And you see government reeling. They haven't got enough information. They don't know what's happening. And most of all, they think, is this just the start? Could there be many more? And then slowly the government begins to get a handle on what's going on. They understand that this is probably Al-Qaeda, and they understand that Al-Qaeda was probably harbored in Afghanistan. And then slowly they begin to formulate policy. And, they come up with the Bush Doctrine, which says, we're going to go after the terrorists, which is what people had always done. But we're also going to go after countries that harbour them. And so that becomes the Bush Doctrine, which which is the kind of first stake in the ground of the policy that rolls out over 2 wars in the next 20 years.
And we're obviously still seeing the fallout of those decisions, be they right or wrong.
The film was broadcast in the UK and it dropped on Apple TV Plus platform on the 31st of August. And so that was the day at which American troops left Afghanistan for the last time. And so there was this sort of amazing symmetry that we obviously didn't plan for. We made a film about the beginning of that event, and the news on BBC One immediately after our film went out was about the end of that event.
Have you had any feedback from George W. Bush on the film or any of the other key participants?
Well, I've been in touch with lots of the participants, as I do. I've come to learn that I'm quite an unusual documentary maker in that I still know everybody. I know many of the people who have been in my films. I made a film 24 years ago about a school teacher in an inner city comprehensive, and just the other day I was talking to the person who was 12 at the time. We were wondering whether or not we should have a 25th anniversary party. So, yeah, I've been in touch with lots of people in the film and they like it. They think I represented their day fairly. And, that's the purpose of them being involved. And that's the story they wanted to tell.
Yeah, well, as I say, it's a remarkable historical document. If you haven't seen it, it's available on BBC iPlayer in the UK. And then presumably the rest of the world, it's on Apple TV Plus.
Exactly.
And now it's time for Story of the Week, where Adam gets to highlight the TV industry story that's caught his eye in the past 7 days. Adam, what's your story of the week?
Well, there's a news article in Broadcast Magazine which says landmark deal on climate content. It says UK broadcasters and streamers come together at COP26 and pledge to ensure that issues surrounding climate change are given a higher profile across all genres. And it goes on to say that convened by Albert, the Screen Industry Organisation for Environmental Sustainability, 12 broadcasters and streamers committed to more climate storytelling on screen across all genres.
In your documentary making career, Adam, has sustainability played an important part of how you've gone about things up till now? And do you think this new deal is going to change the way we all make shows?
Well, I've made a film about animals, but I've never made a film about climate change. And I think that's shocking and awful. And I think clearly as a media industry, we've failed. An existential threat is arriving on our doorsteps. We're already seeing crop failures in Brazil and in Russia. We're seeing famines caused by climate change, and those effects of, we're seeing floods and storms. I was in Austin, Texas in February, and we were completely snowed in the worst climate event in 70 years in that place. And that's because of climate change. We're seeing this extraordinary thing that's happening to the planet, and yet, broadly speaking, we fail to capture audiences' attention. And, that's got to stop. We've got to get everybody to understand just how serious this is, how quickly it's coming, that we can do more. We can do more as individuals, but more significantly, we can do more as governments. Because in the end, it's only governments that are going to solve this.
Have you got plans to make a film about climate change or an aspect of climate change, or I suppose different way into the issue?
For certainty. I mean, I think that's, it has to be our responsibility as broadcasters and as program makers to turn our industry around and to make films that reflect this crisis. And I think, I think it's awful and shocking that I've not done that in 25 years of program making, because I'm as responsible as everybody else. And so, yeah, I've got a series of ideas that I'm germinating in the hope that I can tell stories about our diminishing climate.
And now it's time in the show where Adam gets to nominate his hero of the week. Who are you nominating for your hero of the week, Adam?
Well, I can't not nominate Serena Kennedy. Serena Kennedy was the head of production on my film about 9/11. She was also the head of line producer for Edgar Wright's Sparks Brothers film, 2 massive films that she helped produce during COVID. And she was given the Grierson British Documentary Awards Hero of the Year award a few weeks ago because of the extraordinary work that she did in, enabling us to make a film on the one hand, but also she made a series of creative decisions about the 9/11 film. She had a view that this could only be one sort of film. It could only be big and world-beating. And unless you aspired for that, you wouldn't get access to the president. And so, that's one of the reasons she got given the Hero of the Year award, and that's surely why she's my Hero of the Week.
And who or what are you telling to get in the bin?
Well, I think bullying. I think bullying, is ravaged and rampaging across the TV industry. It has for 25 years. And although people, are trying to do work around it, it's still a modus operandi that exists. It's got no place in a creative life.
Have you ever witnessed any bullying? Do we think it is really common? You say it's rampaging across the industry. Do you think it's really as widespread as we might think?
Yeah. Over the years, I've witnessed and been subject to bullying. I don't operate on sets, but I think it's I think 25 years ago, there was a view that you had to have sort of strong creative conversations and that those people in power should have it. And so I think that legacy remains. There are extraordinary creative leaders across the industry 25 years ago that had a view that they were impermeable because they were in positions of power. And that legacy continues. I've seen nothing to suggest that it doesn't.
Well, hopefully that's another issue that everyone in the TV industry can perhaps start taking a little bit more seriously as we go into 2022, hopefully make things a little bit better, not only from a climate change perspective, but also the way that we treat each other on set. We've got Lyndsay from the Production Guild coming on the show in a little while, so be looking forward to speaking to her about what we might be able to do practically to stamp this out once and for all. Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really enjoyed speaking with you. I'll put an episode link in the description to 9/11 inside the President's War Room, so everyone can go, and if you haven't seen it, you can easily click and go through and watch the film. Best of luck with your projects in the future.
Great. Thank you so much.
My final guest on this week's show is Professor Lyndsay Duffy, CEO of the Production Guild of Great Britain. Welcome to the show, Lyndsay.
Thank you for inviting me. Really pleased to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you on, and so many things we want to chat about when it comes to production and the production sector. Obviously, lots of hot topics around there right now, and we heard earlier on in the show, Adam was talking about a couple of issues there. Before we do that, tell us about the Production Guild of Great Britain and what you do.
Great. So we're the Production Guild of Great Britain. We're a membership organisation for production grades, essentially. So we look after producers, line producers, production managers, production accounts, visual effects supervisors, and many, many more, but very focused on those grades. As well as our individual members, we have over 100 business partners. So again, covers everything within production services, really. So we have the streamers, the Netflixes and the Amazon Primes, through to studios, Warner Brothers, broadcasters, as well as all those production services like facilities, honey wagons, catering, medical services. So everything is in one place to help our members' productions. So we're really, really proud of the quality of calibre of our members, all working across film and high-end TV at the highest levels.
Okay. And so your members, they're individual freelancers. Is that right?
So there's a mixture of those that are permanently employed by studios or broadcasters and freelancers as well. So there's a mixture, but they will all fit within one of those grades that I identified. So as well as looking after them and representing in terms of industrial relations, we run an availability service, which at the moment is pretty much no one's available, everybody's working. But it's very, very attractive proposition for our members. We run our awards, so we've got those coming up soon. We have networking events. We managed to fit one in person this year, which was amazing. We run training, masterclasses, but essentially it's making sure that our members are up to date with the latest information and that it's accurate. And particularly during, I don't want to mention it, but the pandemic, how can we not mention it? The quest and thirst for knowledge, and what are we doing as we all try to muddle through it? Really, we really came into our own, really representing the membership and production, and really helping to move things forward. So so it's a really connected network, and really, really proud, as I say, of the caliber that we have, within our membership.
You mentioned the pandemic. I mean, it's been an incredibly challenging time for everybody in production. There's lots of distribution businesses out there have been able to get through and thrive, many of them, because of a lot of catalogue that they've had and their ability to move that. But, when it comes to the production sector of the TV industry, obviously been hugely affected. Before we come on to talk about that, actually, just you mentioned the Netflixes and the Amazon Primes and all the other major SVODs and businesses that support you. How do they support you? How are they involved in the Production Guild then?
So they very much support us through, it might be through masterclasses or through special screenings for our members. Again, it's all about knowledge sharing and being part of that network. So they're hugely supportive. So when we set up, for example, our nations and regions hubs, which is a new thing for us, we've just launched Production Guild of Great Britain, Bristol and South West, Netflix and ADF facilities helped sponsor that so that we could seed that money to get that off the ground. So it's always about what do our members need and what do our business partners need, and the two go hand in hand. So we're always looking to see what initiatives we can get off the ground, all about adding value and impact to support the production world. So we're really, really lucky to have all of those working with us and supporting.
So let's go back to talk about the dreaded P word and how production has coped really over these past, coming up to 2 years, aren't we, nearly, as the Production Guild. How have you seen things change for your members, in terms of the challenges that they've had to deal with and where we are now?
Sure. So we're very focused on film and high-end television. So I'm speaking, I suppose, mainly on that kind of part of the industry. So it was unbelievable, wasn't it? In March 2020, production stopped. I mean, it's a historical moment, a landmark moment. And it was, how are we going to get this back off the ground? So it was a really amazing feat, actually, how the industry pulled together, really led by the British Film Commission, who put together a task force and invited all the necessary stakeholders, including the Production Guild, to look at what do we do, what are the guidelines we put together. And it was very much in real time. I think the first big feature to get back into production was Jurassic World Dominion. So that was really a test case. And as the guidelines were being put together, they were sort of doing it in real time as well. So I think there's something like they did 40,000 COVID tests to keep their production running, 500-page dossier of how that all worked in practice. So the industry did really well. And I think within about 3 months, we were back into production in a big feature sense, and some big high-end television programs like War of the Worlds was another trailblazer. So it was really about the industry coming together and, obviously liaising with government, but sort of independent of that, just saying, right, what are the challenges that we have? How are we going to overcome them and keep the production wheels turning? So I think that was, really impressive to do. Of course, the guidelines have changed a little bit as we move along. I think the British Film Commission, it's sort of a thorn in their side, but also a blessing that they have to keep updating these guidelines for us. But the industry is adhering to that. And I think in television, PACT was a leader, our counterpart there, making sure that guidelines were followed as well. So we saw that happen. And in the last quarter of 2020, I mean, the recovery was incredible. There was a £2.34 billion spend in film and high-end television, something like that, which is just incredible. So really good recovery and some really good quality productions. And, British content is so in demand. People can't consume enough of it. So keeping that going is really important. Through the pandemic, there's been obviously winners and losers. I think winners, virtual reality and pushing the boundaries and really understanding how that works. We're seeing an increase in the use of that in productions, which I think is really exciting. So we'll see what happens there. We introduced a role called the COVID supervisor, which again was sort of happened overnight, and the Production Guild of Great Britain ran some training to help develop that role as well. So we spoke to Our counterparts, the Producers Guild of America, the British Film Commission, partnered with us on this, and we involved, again, necessary stakeholders to really look at that role and see what was needed. Because there's a difference between COVID marshals that are telling you to keep your masks on and wash your hands, to a really high-level COVID supervisor that's liaising between production management and health and safety, dealing with multi-million-pound budgets. So the decisions that those high-level COVID supervisors are making can affect the budget between 8 and 30%. So, some really big decisions to be made to enable, of course, everything is safe and health and safety is being adhered to, but also thinking sensibly about schedules and the impact to the bottom line as well. So we were really proud to do that training.
Yeah, so just so I understand that, so that COVID role, so that was your recommendation to bring that in as a standard production requirement when it's coming to any production, or I know we're just talking about high-end drama when it comes to TV, but has that now been adopted right across, factual production as well, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I'm less au fait with the factual production, but yes, they've got COVID coordinators. I mean, if you're on a factual production, you might only have perhaps 4 on your crew, so it's slightly different and a bit more manageable. On a high-end TV or film, you might have 200 plus cast crew, hundreds and hundreds, in terms of level and scale as what's needed. So yes, absolutely factual are following protocols, but they may have a slightly different approach just because of the scale of productions. But certainly for film and high-end television, absolutely, that COVID supervisor role has been adopted. And I'm sure you're aware as well of the government restart scheme, which was about production insurance, because that was the sticking point. We had the guidelines in place about the protocols of how to run your production safely, but no one wanted to insure a production. So the government's scheme, which went across film and TV and factual as well. So that was, a godsend to be able to really push things forward. And that scheme is remaining in place. I can't remember when it ends up. It's had another extension, which we're all really grateful for as well. So yeah, it was really about the industry coming together and making decisions, not waiting necessarily for government to tell us, but for us to tell them and inform them and work with them. And I have to say they were very supportive, particularly that insurance production restart scheme, which was, I said, really, really important sticking point to move us forward.
And that COVID supervisor role as well, presumably that is linked to the insurance essentially, because you need to have a COVID supervisor to be able to have insurance on a production in place now.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be following all those guidelines and recommendations and so forth as well.
Yeah.
So, and ultimately we want everyone to be safe and we want the wheels to keep turning on production as well. So it's a good thing to have. But as I say, the impact of COVID has added 8 to 30% onto production budgets. Who funds that? How do you absorb those costs? It's millions potentially. So that's been interesting as well. But we're learning more, we're working through it. The question is, at what point do you ever withdraw a COVID supervisor role now? Because now we're aware of it. The role title may change if COVID ever leaves us. But I think we'd always want to future-proof our productions now from any other pandemic or anything else that might come in the future. So it'll be interesting to see how that role evolves and what we do going forward. But at the moment, it's very much that role is with us for the foreseeable future, at least.
Here to stay, by the looks of it. Yeah.
I was trying not to say that, but
yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
As you say, who pays for it? I guess it's going to be the end consumer. We'll all pay for it through our streaming services, I'm sure. I'm sure that cost will get shunted along to us. I mean, there's been so many different pipeline issues. As you say, production completely shut down. And during that period, we spoke to lots of different producers during the depths of lockdown. And obviously, everybody was furiously going into development, and things opened up again, and all of these amazing projects that are developed to the point of being pretty much ready to go. And then we've seen this huge demand as a result of the pandemic in streaming services, of new services launching, Disney Plus, Netflix going from strength to strength, and lots of other new players as well, which we don't need to go through all of them, but we all know who they are. And that in its own right has caused an enormous amount of demand, as you say, for content, which is also playing out when it comes to production crews. And we're hearing this a lot. Who's available? You mentioned earlier on, your availability service. Nobody's available because everybody's on productions. Obviously, there's the consequences of that. Market forces mean that people are now getting poached, aren't they, from one production to another. We keep hearing reports of people being paid double, which, I suppose if you look at it from the individual's perspective, they haven't worked for 6 months and now they're being paid double. So, yeah, okay, but it's not great practice, is it? Hopping on and off productions.
No, absolutely not. And it's not best practice. And everything that the Guild is about and our members are about is about being the best in production. So it's not something that we would condone. I understand it, of course. But yeah, it's a small world. And, if people are jumping ship and, it might be remembered. So just be sort of mindful of the longer tail on that. So it is really important to manage this boom that we're in because we want it to continue. I mean, it's fantastic news, but needs a bit of careful thought, good training and good industry professionals. You can't just necessarily do it in a weekend course and you're a production accountant, off you go. It takes some time to get them industry ready. So there's frantic work being done by ourselves, by our counterparts, by Screen Skills, the BFI funding things. There's lots and lots of activity happening. The issue is the scale and time. How quickly can we turn around, reach enough people to keep that going? Because we need thousands potentially. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I was interested in what does the problem look like in terms of numbers? I mean, how many more production crew at various different levels, of course, but how bad is the shortage behind the camera talent?
Well, there's lots of different surveys trying to quantify and work out an actual number. I mean, we're talking, tens of thousands potentially. So, and it's across all grades. There's particularly production accountants, production management as well, but across the technical grades as well. So there's not one grade that you could say is fixed. So we need lots more people. But there's also innovative stuff happening. There's lots of ideas about retraining from other sectors to come across. So we did during the pandemic, for example, there were theatre staff, music, events with some really good transferable skills that can come across to film and television there. The other thing that we need to get better at is retaining talent. We've heard lots of stories about, better well-being on sets, a bit of support for those juggling childcare or looking after elderly parents that leave the industry. So we're trying to look at what can we do, what support can we give. But also, there's opportunities within this as well. And we're very much embracing that. I mean, for us, our training has quadrupled over the last year, which is amazing. So we're trying to make sure what we're doing with our training is creating learning communities. So we have a virtual learning environment that anyone on our courses then become part of. So it's great if you suddenly become a production manager and you're on your first gig, but there's bound to be other questions that you still don't know while you're in the job. So having, sort of buddies and mentor systems and so forth to help you so that you don't get burnt out or kind of that overloaded and overwhelmed by a new role suddenly. And as I said, these budgets are huge, multi-million-pound budgets, so much pressure, such big teams. There's nowhere to hide. So it's making sure we've got all of that support around as well. So as I said, we're trying to make sure our messaging is very positive. This is great, but we've got to be really careful, really prepared. And we can see what's coming. If we keep going with these initiatives, we will be fine. But the UK is very much a destination of choice for filming. People love our talent. We are, the world's best. And we're really proud of that and want to maintain that. So the industry is really pulling together to try and solve this as quickly and professionally as possible.
You mentioned transferable skills from the music industry, for example, and I've witnessed that on a recent production where there has been a shortage of talent on a particular production. Tour managers and set designers from live music who hadn't been able to tour came in. First production they'd ever worked on, and it was a major production for a streaming business, and those logistical skills were completely transferable. And it didn't matter the fact that I hadn't worked on a TV production before. And I think I also read about some Heathrow staff were being trained up into the TV industry when obviously there was no flying going on. I mean,
that's right.
Do you think there'll be more of that as we see, all of these people with transferable skills coming into the industry? And are there enough people who have got transferable skills to deal with the shortage that the industry has?
Yeah, absolutely. I think transferable skills is a really great idea. The Heathrow scheme was run by Pinewood and their training, which has worked really well. We've also had veterans coming across as well from military, which have been great. Medical people coming across for their health and safety and, all of those kind of areas as well. So there's absolutely so many transferable skills. Again, I think it's sometimes people haven't considered a career path in film and television. So again, it's sort of as well working at the other end of the scale with schools to let them know this is a viable career option as well. And as well as the roles that we know really well, like producers, directors and cinematographers, there's something like 200 roles on a film set. So, film and big high-end television set. So, it's the grips and, the gaffers, and there's so many other roles and things that people probably don't know about as well. So it's educating about those different paths and seeing where those transferable links are as well. So yeah, absolutely. I suppose the danger is it's sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, because we're taking from music and theatre and they're going to hopefully get back up and running to full scale. And we're like, we want to keep them now, thank you. So,
Yeah.
so we'll see. But yeah, as I said, we're trying to embrace it as a real opportunity to get more diversity and inclusion in as well. We need different voices, different life experiences, different backgrounds, experiences to all contribute to that environment, that creative environment. So yeah, a lot of work to do, but we're embracing the challenge.
And I guess one of the other challenges that seems to be, or an issue that we've seen that seems to be getting worse in production, and I don't know whether it is or whether it's becoming more and more reported now, but obviously the issue of bullying has, really come to the fore, I think, over the past few months. Whether that is a reason, that's been driven by this stress and demand, clearly that's not an excuse. I mean, how are you seeing it? Do you think bullying on set is on the rise? And what can we do about it? How can we finally stamp this out?
Well, obviously, we don't condone bullying, harassment in any shape or form, and we have our code of conduct, and we very much work with the film and television charity, with Bectu, with our counterparts on their various initiatives that have been doing some really good work on leading that. I think it is about, it's hard to say, isn't it? I really hope it's not on the rise and genuinely feel it isn't, but people are calling it out more, which is the right thing to do. And I think we need to get better at it, and we need to listen to each other more. We do need to have that well-being side of things being looked after, and I think there's some examples of good practice where we're having well-being coordinators on set, and mental health support, and again, independent of the production, so that people have got somewhere else to go, or making sure there's on the call sheets there's a helpline or a HR department or somebody else that they can speak to independent of their line manager if things are happening. So we've supported the Call It Out app, and I said very supportive of that. However, lots of our members are heads of departments and sort of leading these things. And I, think there is genuine willingness that they want their productions to go well, and they want people to be looked after. So I really hope it is a minority issue, but we're taking it very seriously and supporting campaigns where we can, and, obviously disseminating that to our membership so that they're very aware of best practice and what should be done. But you're absolutely right. Film sets, high-end television is a stressful environment, and some of these things are exacerbating it. If people are promoted too soon and getting out of their depths and not having anyone to talk to and share sort of worries and so forth. So again, it's sort of trying to put support around some of those areas that we're hearing about as well. So trying to fix it from a sort of myriad of perspectives. But of course, bullying and harassment, of course, absolutely, we do not condone in any shape or form.
A lot of the time, you might find a producer might be saying, well, I'm being squeezed with all these budgets, because, at the end of the day, the producer is the one who's feeling a lot of this pressure and a lot of this stress. And, they may point actually to the commissioning body, whether that's a network or a streaming business, that are placing this pressure. It might be, you talked about, budgets, COVID budgets going up by 20% or between 8 and 30%, you mentioned earlier on. But, you might not find that that the commissioning party is willing to pay all of that. So, that crunch is felt all the way through the production, which perhaps is leading to a lot of these issues. So do you think the networks and the commissioning bodies and the commissioning companies of this content, do you think they're taking the situation seriously enough? Or, they seem to be, just pointing at the producers and going, it's your problem. Do you think they're taking it seriously enough?
Yeah, no, I think they are taking it seriously, and it is about working together. You make some interesting points about how commissions happen sometimes. Sometimes they're an overnight thing. You wait and wait to get the green light, and then it's like, right, you're in production tomorrow, and that's not necessarily helpful. So I think we need to work together. But yeah, they're absolutely taking it seriously, and as I said, they're involved in supporting initiatives, the Coalition for Change, for example, the film and TV charities work. So I think we all share in this and have a shared responsibility, and I think they are aware of that.
So 2022, we're looking ahead to a new year. And obviously, we've got this rather inconvenient Omicron that's raised its head over the past few days, which we don't really know how dangerous it is, or hopefully it's not going to be something that's going to evade the vaccines that have been rolled out. How do you think the production industry should be viewing Omicron and this new variant that we're all a bit terrified about? How do you think the production industry should be viewing it? And can we see another more stringent regulations coming in to dictate things on set to deal with this new variant?
I think the film and TV industry has proved itself to be very resilient. To be honest, most of the restrictions we continued with. So for most productions, they still continued with, daily testing, weekly testing, with wearing masks, with lots of bubbles and crew bubbles and so forth as well. So a lot of the restrictions that we were living in our general life previously in lockdowns, a lot of that has continued across to productions to be uber careful and to really ensure that we don't go back down those dark days that we were in back in March 2020. So, as I said, we've got the British Film Commission's guidelines are very robust. They've just been updated again to reflect the Omicron variant and government advice and so forth as well. So, it's not, of course, it's not ideal. We all want this thing to be gone and past us. But I think, we've got some of the best medical teams working with us, Cavendish Polaris and First Option Safety, who are really at the top of their game, advising the industry as well. So I feel like, we're in as good a position as we possibly could be, mainly because we've continued with a lot of those restrictions just to be sure our film and high-end TV productions can continue.
So, Lindsay, now it's time for your story of the week, the TV industry news item that's caught your eye in the past 7 days. What's your story of the week?
Well, I chose about the Barb data, now including the SVODs, which before we've not really had enough data. It's been really patchy. So we hear facts and figures like Squid Games has reached 142 million homes globally. But what does that mean in the UK? And what does that look like from our sort of linear and terrestrial viewing point of view? So I thought that was really interesting.
And do we believe them?
Well, exactly.
Do we believe them as well, right? I mean, who's to say that it's not half that figure? They're not sharing any data, so we're
exactly.
taking them on trust.
Who knows? So I thought that was quite interesting. Again, it's commissioners and those that are funding productions are always trying to look at audience behaviour and what's going to hit the chord. So I think that's quite interesting. And certainly when I was in production, particularly in factual entertainment, you lived and died by the overnights. You'd be waiting with bated breath to see did your show hit its mark. So I think that's quite interesting. And I think it was Jake Cantor who put out an interesting tweet that said Country File beat Squid Games in those ratings if we now look at them side by side in the new Barb data, which was kind of amusing when it's reached 142 million homes globally, 1.65 billion hours has been watched of Squid Games or whatever the figures are. So I thought that was interesting. I also thought it always mystified me, I think when I was doing my media degree 30 years ago or so, that how Barb was done then with such a small sample. And I think they had to write in diaries then. I think we've moved on since then, and it's now all coded into into metadata into the TV programs and so forth. But yeah, such a small sample. I think it's 5,300 homes or something that they take their sample from. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting to see how things are moving on and what that might reveal or not reveal. But that was my story.
I think there maybe is a perception that a lot of the streamers are, all conquering. And, there's certainly an understanding within friends that, everybody's watching Squid Game or whatever. So it must be the biggest thing, pretty much out there. But it's actually not, is it? As you say, in relation to the networks, those figures are not that strong. Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? It just turns it on its head. But we couldn't have lived without Netflix through lockdown. So I'm not going to say too much more than that. But I just thought it was really interesting to see them side by side and what that may or may not reveal.
Definitely. Well, it's also good to have an independent body who are looking at these figures and letting us view things from a slightly more independent angle. And now it's time in the show for your Hero of the Week, Lindsay. Who are you nominating for your Hero of the Week?
Well, I'm going to sort of stay on theme with what I've been talking about, I guess, and I'm going to nominate the head of production at the British Film Commission, Samantha Perahia, who has been putting together all of these guidelines. She's been updating them non-stop, dealing with DCMS, getting things approved, getting that out to industry as quickly and timely as possible. And as I said, it was a blessing, and I think it's been really hard work for them to keep that going. But we are so grateful for their advice, because production is sort of hanging on their every word to ensure we can keep production wheels turning, which is what we all want. So yeah, I'm nominating her.
All right, Samantha's a unsung hero no longer. That's great. And who or what are you telling to get in the bin?
Omicron can get in the bin, please. Sorry, boring, but it's got to go. Sorry. I'm very on brand.
No, absolutely. It's actually, you're the first person. You've got in quick with Omicron, and nobody else can use that now.
But people are saying they're not sure how to pronounce it. I'm not even sure if it's pronounced that. Some are saying it's Omicron and different variations. But anyway, the whole thing can go in the bin, whatever it's called.
There's a marketing communications agency or group called Omnicom. They've got their own corona moments at the moment that they're dealing with. On a slightly more serious side, I mean, a lot of executives are looking at, markets into the new year, NatP's happening, real screens happening in person, various other events. I mean, we're going to have to wait and see if this new variant is as harmful as some of the scientists have said, but others are saying actually it's nothing worse than a common cold or a sniffle. We've got to look to the scientists again, the rock stars of our age, really, and let them tell us what's safe and what isn't.
Yes.
Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on TellyCast. Really enjoyed our chat. Really fascinating to hear about Production Guild of Great Britain. I didn't know much about your organisation before now, so it's great to hear about all the work that you're doing. And good luck. Have a great rest of the year, and hope to see you in person in the new year.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, that's about it for another week's TellyCast. As always, thanks a lot for listening. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to the show and share it with friends and colleagues. And why not sign up for our free newsletter, TellyCast Plus? Just search TellyCast and sign up on our website. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in London. Until next Thursday, stay safe.